Imagine for a moment that you're invisible. No one can see you, no one can hear you, and you're safe to do whatever you want to do. So, who are you going to take a sneaky peek at? What secrets are you going to listen into? What mischief might you get up to? Sadly, being invisible is not all it's cracked up to be. There are parts of our society and societies across the world where people, to all intents and purposes, have become invisible. And they've become invisible because they haven't got a voice. They either haven't got the opportunity or the platform or maybe the confidence to make their views and their needs and their rights heard by others. And the thing with not being visible, not having a voice, is that you can't influence what's going on around you, can you? That actually you're subject to actions and decisions that other people make that affect your life, and you have no power over that. But when you do have a voice, and a voice that can be heard, you have the potential and the opportunity to influence those changes that happen to you. When you have no voice, you become invisible, and invisibility excludes. So, what are we talking about here? Well, of course, we could talk about countries and political regimes where people are simply not allowed or excluded from having a voice, from having a say, and those that try to have a say are quickly silenced. Or we could look at things a little closer to home. Governments in our own country, for example, where people simply do not feel as if they are truly being listened to or heard or taken into account. But you know what? We could talk about workforces as well. You know, workforces that say we really respect equality, but they don't. Not really. And what about all of those boardrooms that are still waiting for women to sit around that board table? But you know what we're also talking about are migrants and refugees. We're also talking about unaccompanied children in the jungle camp in Calais. We're talking about people of colour, of race, of religion. We're talking about people who maybe suffer a disability, about people and families who suffer from mental illness. And you know what? We might even be talking about people over 50 here. Or people who've got to the end of their working life, retire, and suddenly, poof, seem to disappear in a cloud of smoke. And yes, we are talking about those little girls in Rotherham who didn't have a voice and no one to give voice to their plight. They're pretty weighty subjects, aren't they? Yeah. But for every person that has stood up and fought for the rights of others, for every person who has stood up for their belief or for their passion, they will have had one thing in common. And that thing in common was that they had a moment, a very personal moment, where they chose to go from being invisible to being visible, where they chose from going from a place of safety to a place of exposure, where they chose to stick their heads above the parapet and be seen and be heard. And it will have been a personal choice and moment. Back in 1988, my mum and dad celebrated their silver wedding. Now, I come from Bradford in West Yorkshire, and in Bradford, West Yorkshire, when you've been married 25 years, you have a bit of a do. And so Mum and Dad had a bit of a do, and it was brilliant. And I was there with my fiancé, my siblings were there, families and friends, and do you know what? It was really smashing, as we say in Yorkshire. And about halfway through the evening, I had a bit of a moment. And you may have had a moment like this in your own lives. And it was one of those things where it was almost like an opportunity opened up in front of me. An opportunity to do something. An opportunity to say something. It was a bit like having a little voice inside my head going, "Oh, go on, Catherine, do something. Why don't you say something? Why don't you honour your parents? Why don't you say something to pay respect to your mum and dad? Why don't you just say something to make this occasion even better?" So do you know what I did? I bottled it. I said nothing. And you know what? The moment went just like that. And there were no consequences to that. Mum and Dad didn't know I was going to say anything. Even I didn't know that I could have said something. But I knew, and I was disappointed. I wonder what it is that stops us sometimes from saying the things that we could and we should or that we need to say. And maybe when I've been reflecting on this, maybe it's that just occasionally, it's that we know we could, we know we should, we just don't know what it is that we have to say. Now, many years ago, my late mother-in-law had been recently widowed. And she was walking down one of the streets here in Nantwich. And she saw a friend on the same side of the road, and they got eye contact. And the friend knew the circumstances of my mother-in-law. And then suddenly the friend dropped the eye contact, scuttled across the road, and dashed into a random shop. Now, I think that every one of us in this room understands what was going on there, don't we? That friend knew that she should say something, didn't she? She wanted to say something, didn't she? It's just that she didn't know what it was that she had to say. So in the absence of not knowing what to say, she said nothing. And it hurt. But there again, maybe there are situations in our lives where we know what to say. It's just that we're not that sure on how to say it. After working in lots of different industries and with many different companies over the course of my career, I have seen many, many people, whether it's in conversations or whether it's around the table in meetings, many people lean back just at the point at which they should be leaning in to make their view known and heard. And it's almost as if they go, "Oh, no, I want to say this, I want to say it. Don't know how to say it." Or even, "Oh, I'll let them say it, because they'll probably say it better than me." And I think there may be some resonance in there in the room. But do you know what? Sometimes there are situations, aren't there, where we know exactly what to say, we know exactly how to say it, and we jolly well say it. And nobody takes a blind bit of notice. Now that is really irritating, isn't it? Yeah. What we're talking about here is, yes, having a voice, knowing what's important to us to say, but it's also about saying it in a way that people listen. It's also about saying it in a way that people listen and do something about, react or respond, or at least resonate with. A number of years ago, I was working with a client on her big presentation. And Jeanette is a really interesting character, actually. She is the MD of a family manufacturing company. And over 20 years, she has been spectacularly successful in avoiding giving presentations. And she'd do that whole boss thing. You know, the bit that goes, "Oh," to her member of staff, "You do this presentation. It'll be good for your self-development. But she was coming to work with me, and I said to her, as I say to quite a lot of my clients actually, I said to her, "Why now, Jeanette?" And what she said to me was so profound that I've never forgotten it. Because what she said was this: "Catherine, what I've got to say now is so important that it's overcoming any fear I've had before now." Just think about that for a moment. What I've got to say now is so important that it overcomes any fear I've had before now. In 2000, 12 years after my mum and dad's silver wedding, my dad died very suddenly and very unexpectedly. And there was another opportunity that lay in front of me, and that was an opportunity to talk at his funeral. And I did. I stood up there and I paid respect to a really lovely man. And I honoured a wonderful father. And I'd like to think that he would have been very proud that that's what I did. Because it was so important to me. That importance overcame any barrier that had previously held me back. You know, when we think about people who have stood up for the rights of others, who have represented others, who have stood up with a passion and with a belief, whether that is the Martin Luther Kings of this world or the Malalas of this world on that big, wide political world stage, or whether it's people that you know in your communities and in your families that have stood up to give voice to something that's of importance to them, they've done it because it has been so important that it's overcome any fear or barriers that had held them back before. That they've connected with something where it's too important to keep quiet, too important to stay silent. So, what are my thoughts on this as I draw to a close? Well, here's a couple to get you thinking. First of all, question authority always. Engage and ask questions of those people and those institutions that have huge influence on our day-to-day lives and our futures and the future of our children. And recognise that for every single person in this room, there will be opportunities that open up in front of us. There will be moments of personal choice where we get to choose. Do we stay invisible or do we make ourselves visible? Do we stay safe or do we choose exposure? Do we choose to stay silent or do we use our voice to make our difference and to create that change? Because I don't know about you, I don't think anybody in our society and society in general, nobody deserves to be invisible. Our communities are far stronger where everyone has a voice. And when they have a voice that listened to, when they can be accounted for, and when everybody counts. Thank you.